Hello and welcome to this tutorial where I will be making an alien gray out of this armature as you see here. And as always, I start out with a reference drawing. This is very important when working in the realm of stop motion because you want something that's to scale, but you also want to use other things too as a reference, such as Zolar here, who is from the Blue Sentai series, kind of to give an idea of proportions and how I would like to make this puppet come to fruition. As you can see, I have tinfoil. And I usually do a base where I just like to crumple it in as much as I can. And the thing is, over time, you can go ahead and add more layers. The thing is, you don't want too much. That will, cause it to break and then possibly stick onto the clay, but I'll be showing in a sec how to remedy that. But this is just something I do to make it as lightweight because clay is heavy. As you can see here, I've added electrical tape, and that helps with keeping the tin foil from breaking apart, also makes it easier to add the clay on. So getting my sculpting tools ready and stuff, I have my batch of clay actually ready. Mixed several different colors that I thought would work well with this character. Kind of want a little bit of a light blue, but as you can see, I tend to do the mixing myself, but the key thing is to always flatten it out, then overlap, and just keep working at it. And it could take up to about 5 minutes. As you can see, this is all sped up and cut down. So once you finally get the right consistency, the look, you just kind of go in. There's always still a few little colors in there that linger, so always kind of helps to kind of check the surface, make sure it's all the right shade that you're looking for. And so adding little strips. And I like to keep it as thin as possible at first because you just want to add on a layer that basically conforms to a shape. Now the thing with working with claymation is that, doing stuff with like muscles or trying to have like a very toned physique for a character can be done the first time around. As you're animating, it will start to misshape and whatnot, but having just that base shape at least kind of gives you an idea of where to build on top of if you want to go that route of adding muscles, elbows, all that. Not something I'm particularly worried about doing in this tutorial, but just a simple base covering before you add on anything else. Now I could go on more about the particulars of how this process goes, but obviously I'm going to just show instead of tell, and to compensate for that, I figured talk a little bit about this, character I'm making, because it's just your basic alien gray, the alien that we're very familiar with in pop culture, and we've seen just about in every iteration of anything having to do with aliens in cartoons or movies, whatnot. I think the image that probably came closest to what I'm representing first appeared in the public consciousness via the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case, and it is alleged to be the first ever alien abduction case where people were basically saying we were taken away aboard an unidentified craft by entities that did not look human. But some people actually argue and wonder whether Betty and Barney Hill maybe did just have a nightmare per se and actually had recounted something they had seen possibly in pop culture, but there really weren't too many examples of what we look at now as the gray alien. I guess you could say minor imps and demons from, mythology and folklore, might come somewhat close, like the goblin or whatever, but the gray alien that we know of today is systemic from that case, and I think the solidification of this image came about with Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, where the cover illustration had a rather interesting portrayal of the tall gray with black eyes, and also introduced the idea of there being a difference between the little gray aliens and the tall gray aliens. And I'm actually portraying here one of the tall gray aliens. They're called the Doctors in Strieber's book, and that's how and the way Betty and Barney Hill recounted their encounters with the entities described the tall ones as being sort of like the ones in charge, and the smaller ones were, I think, alleged to be drones of some sort, like they were perceived as being robots. I might be wrong, but they just were seen as kind of like being the servants on the ship, the ones who take the people away. And these were the ones that Betty and Barney Hill said they saw when their car was stopped with these figures standing in the road, and afterwards, everything went blank. So their recounting of this was all through hypnosis, and I believe Whitley Strieber had undergone the same thing as well as Travis Walton, who also had been abducted in Heber, Arizona, was missing for several days, and then, you know, there's a whole movie about it called Fire in the Sky. I don't know how. I think it's more about the abduction scene takes the most liberties with what had actually happened, but the film itself about how his friends who had seen him get abducted were kind of in hot water, thinking that maybe he was killed. Long story short, these images have all been solidified by this media, and I guess I'm kind of doing somewhat of a tribute to that in a short that I'm going to work on, but I think my ambition is actually to talk a little bit about something else that's alleged, and it's strictly alleged. I cannot say anything that I'm going to talk about is pure fact, but I wanted to do a short about the Dulce base in New Mexico, located under the Archuleta Mesa, and it's believed that possibly there might be a military base that is built in layers, where if you go further deeper into the layer, you find that there's no longer military personnel running the place, but it's actually the aliens running the place. And I want to do a little bit about a special ops officer that, you know, is kind of going through things rather routinely until he comes across this, which will be inspired by the account of Phil Schneider, who said he was working in a military tunneling engineering project where they stumbled across these gray aliens when they hit the lower level, and that apparently one of these things had shot at him. And there's footage of it. I guess I could provide links in the bio, and I probably should, but you know, I don't want to get in too much trouble for spreading conspiracies, but, you know, Phil Schneider did commit suicide eventually, and there's a whole story about that too. So, but still, that's just something I kind of want to, you know, work on with the story, and not to placate the idea that, you know, we're in some deep-seated conspiracy and stuff like that, but it's folklore, and I don't mind adding to folklore and even throwing my own spin on it, and that you will see, you know, as we go on. So, with that all said, you can see we got our base layer on, and now it's all about smoothing out and just getting everything ready before we start adding on the various bits. So here is what I would be kind of like the rib cage, because I don't really see this guy as being ripped as much as he's this gaunt gray alien, and so I just kind of slap on pieces on there little by little, as looking back at my reference drawing, and that's always the difficult thing when you're working with stop motion, is transcending the 2D and trying to get more into the 3D. And these are little bits that also I cut to add on the details, but sometimes with this, you know, you could do it by finger, but I really recommend you have your sculpting tools, because they are made for a reason, and they will get all the details in there that you envision. So just all little by little bit. I still went ahead and used my finger because I'm a little old-fashioned like that, I guess. And it's something that actually, you know, you just kind of have to get into a habit of doing, because your tools really will help you in the long run. They're just small areas that you just can't get into as easily, and it's just better that way. Like you see here in between, like the muscles, that's about the only thing I'm really putting on serious detail on. But, you know, you just kind of add these little slabs in there, and there's only so much you can do with your finger before, you know, yes, you have to use that tool. And working with plasticine, you know, it's a modeling clay. It's designed to be easy to work with. It never dries. It's something I've talked about in my other videos. You know, so it's very easy to work with in that sense. The only thing I really have to stress is, as you're using your tools, make sure you're cleaning them all the time. Now, this is something I do. As you can see, I have not built wire for my hands because I tend to freehand it, where I just make sort of like the wrist, which will go into the metal part, and then I go ahead and smooth out and work out the fingers bit by bit. Sometimes I will actually just go ahead and slap on the fingers, but this is kind of an easier one for me because these are long alien gray fingers, big scary hands that are going to go over your face when they're abducting you. And making regular human-sized hands, sometimes, that isn't as easy, and they actually don't hold up as well. So any professional animator out there would probably be saying that's why you should be building wiring for your fingers and stuff. But I tend to work on a bit of an expedited schedule, so this is a little bit quicker for me. And I would say, once they kind of start to wear a little bit, or they look like, I'll say they'll look flaky, then utilize some Vaseline, give it a rub down and whatnot, and it'll be able to maintain the integrity of the hand. And the other thing too is really getting like all the details, because everything has a function. And you see how our wrists and our lower fingers, how the indentations from where they stretch, all that actually does help when it comes to animating versus just making blobby looking hands. But as you can see, I just smooth it in there. And the thing is, as I'm animating, where I have these little hook-ons, make sure you're always moving that as well and not just slapping it around. Now here I'm going to go ahead and finally make the head. Ball of tinfoil, wrap it around, and just try to get a basic shape before finally adding on the details. But this is an easy one. If I were doing like a human face, it would be a little bit more, there would be different steps that I would explain to how to go ahead and make like the right proper functioning head. And obviously, because this is not something that's not going to talk or anything like that, so I don't really have to worry too much about having like the right proportions and stuff for like the area below the nose line. But there it is, all finished. And with the eyes, I want to have these eyes that are sort of protruding out a little bit, so I kind of carve out a little bit in there. And yeah, it doesn't look good, but that's the whole point of using your tools. And sometimes, yes, your hands will help in that sense. But kind of creating sort of like lids, but obviously not lids that are going to open and shut easily. And again, just using little strips, creating these bits here, and then just kind of push it together. But press it in a little bit too, because you don't want it loose, in case it just starts to slop around as you're moving the puppet. And see, it still looks a little flaky, but I went ahead and did that off camera, sort of trying to get it sort of better shaped. And so I add my eyes. And with these, I am going to actually go ahead and add some Vaseline to give them sort of a glossy look, alien look, so to speak. And that they're extra shiny and whatnot. And just a little slip for a mouth. Now, I will use latex gloves to smooth it out and while animating as well. I do not recommend using latex gloves while you're putting it together, because the whole point is you want your gloves where they're at their smoothest and not entirely creased up, because that will show up all over. Your thing's just going to look like unnecessarily look like an old man. But they're definitely, I recommend using them, just to try. If you don't like having fingerprints all over, I don't mind a few, but when you shoot in 4K, sometimes fingerprints tend to look more apparent. But that's just me, and doing a little bit of test and showing demonstration of how you move around with the wiring, making sure that's all in place, and finally adding on a little bit more, because as you're moving the arms around too, you want to make sure there's reinforced clay, so there's not immediate breakage, or at least clay that you can move around as the shoulders would move around when shrugging and whatnot. And I decided to throw a little bit of muscle. But, as you can see, there's still a little bit of fine-tuning to be done, but, I like to make something, so I'm ready to animate right away. But that's pretty much how he came together, and this took approximately about an hour and 15 minutes to make, but this is at least a way of showing how you can go ahead and make a plasticine clay puppet through the most meager means possible. And I hope this was enjoyable to watch. Also hope you enjoyed the little factoids I relate about the alien lore and whatnot. And hope you can check out the channel, watch other videos, get a little flavor of what I might be doing with this guy. We've got so much more planned, or you can always check out some of the videos and the links we have here. So thank you for tuning in. glad if you enjoyed this tutorial. We'll hope to see you next time.